Hi, welcome to School Days, Help for Moms and Dads of School-Age Kids. I'm Danita Bailey.
And I'm David Bailey.
More than 1 in 20 U.S. children and teens have anxiety and depression. So that means, on average, at least one child in every classroom in America is suffering from anxiety or depression. So, really, this is a topic that hits home for David and me. Around this time last year, we started to notice that our fourth graders' grades were beginning to slip. He had always been an AB student, and there was really an abrupt change. So he started to have some pretty severe behavioral problems at home, which was really abnormal from him. He was usually a good kid. And that prompted us to seek therapy and eventual diagnosis of anxiety and depression.
And then since then, another one of our children has been diagnosed with anxiety. And the journey of getting them the help they need was what prompted us to start this radio show, for school days kids, because we just realized that a lot of times parents are suffering silently, and whatever the struggles are, and their unique challenges, and so we decided to get the show started, so we can kind of press into these issues. And support parents on the home front. So we're excited about this episode today.
Yeah, we are. And, like we were saying, that this is something that we have learned a lot about. It has been a lot of trial and error and trying to figure out what works for our child, because just because it works for another person's child doesn't mean that it works for our child. And what would you say, what is the biggest aha moment you've had, or something that you've learned from all of this?
Be flexible. This is something that is new to me. You know, we didn't start this journey of parenting knowing that we're going to have two children that struggle with anxiety and one with depression, and that we have to be flexible and to allow God to work on our hearts so that we can love our children the way they need to and not look at it as an inconvenience or a pain. They are at times, but that's not the ultimate goal, but to get beyond ourselves and not worry about what people think.
That's huge.
Yes.
Because as parents, you want to look like you have it together.
Right.
And, you may receive judgment from other parents because your kid is acting a particular way, or
Right.
you're not disciplining in the way that seems to be the way that,
Right.
but you can't, we've had to change our parenting style for sure to allow for some of the behavioral issues that have come with anxiety and depression.
Right.
And that's been a hard thing to
Yeah.
do.
And it's also allowed us just to open up more and to be
Yeah.
more transparent. I mean, this is about as transparent as you can get being on a radio show here, sharing with, the world, our struggles. But, I know we're not the only ones. And so we want to help parents and support them in any way that we can with all the issues that we bring up. And, we're, like we said before, we're right there. When we say we're right there with you, we're right there
for
with
sure.
you. Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, before we go any further, let me just say that it does take a village. If you hear a great parenting tip or nugget of advice, share it with your parent friends. Facebook it, Instagram it, tweet it, link it in, and add the hashtag School Days Show and hashtag I am School Dazed. And also, we really, really want you to be a part of the show. So if you have any questions or comments about your personal experiences with this, please give us a call. Our phone number is 214-431-5062. I kind of felt like I was begging there. Was that too much?
Hey.
Got to do what I got to do?
What did TLC say? TLC?
I don't know.
TLC? I ain't too proud to beg?
Okay,
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is a different context, but yeah.
Uh,
I'm just saying.
okay, let's move on.
I thought you were going to go with "Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls."
Oh,
No,
that's
that's
a
not
good one,
what-
too.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's
That's what I'm
good.
saying.
This could just be a reminiscent of just all our old 90s jams.
that would be a good topic.
That would be,
We'll do
yeah.
that instead.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe not.
No,
All
we don't have
right.
any questions for that.
So tell us who's here today.
Okay, so today we have Jalea Seals. Hi, Jalea.
Hey.
Hey. She is a licensed professional counselor and the founder of 212, or do you say 212?
I say 212.
Oh, 212.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's room for whatever you want to do, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I like that. All right, so she is so it's 212 behavioral. DFW is in-home parenting support for behavioral issues. She earned her undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of North Texas and her master's in marriage and family counseling from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary on the other side of town. You guys took one of my professors. I went to Dallas Seminary.
Okay.
Yes, and Dr. Bingham, he was the interim. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off topic here. But she's worked with an array of children with anxiety and depression from the typical to the extreme, and her heart is in helping families become more successful, which is the heartbeat of our show. So we are so glad you're here, Jalea, and thank you for spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
All right, well, let's just jump right in. Can you tell us what is major depressive disorder?
Major depressive disorder is basically whenever your depression gets extreme. So whenever it starts inhibiting your functions, there's a big old purple book that professionals use to diagnose different mental illnesses called the DSM, or the Diagnostic of Statistical Manual Mental Disorders. And then a bunch of psychiatrists sit together and they say, hey, what are we going to call this? And they say, I've got an idea. Let's call it major depressive disorder.
Okay.
And so they sit down and they say, okay, here's 9 criteria that people typically have when they're depressed. In order to have this depressive disorder, you need to have at least 5 of them.
Okay.
So, the irritability, difficulty sleeping, not enjoying the things that you used to enjoy, all those sort of things. But practically for parents, what I like to say is if your sadness or the deep sadness that has to have depressed mood starts to impair functioning, that's when we start looking at going to get diagnosed.
And what is generalized anxiety disorder?
GAD. That's
Okay.
fun to say. Generalized
Sounds like
anxiety
gag.
disorder. Yeah, it does. It's not
Like
very
every
fun to say.
profession has their own jargon.
I
So-
know.
Right.
Yeah.
So, it's anxiety that isn't otherwise specified. So it's a big umbrella for anxiety disorders. Underneath it, you have things like OCD or other more fine-tuned mentions of anxiety. But generalized anxiety is something that about 25% of the population has. So
That's a lot.
It's
Really?
a lot of people.
1 in 4.
About 1 in 4 in the United States at least.
Okay.
And it's more prevalent in industrialized nations. And kind of a fun fact in our wastewater system, whenever they go back and treat the water, there are 3 prevalent chemicals that people
Release.
are releasing. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Thank you for helping me.
Because the other words, but
Yeah,
it will
released
pass
back
on.
into
Yes.
the stream. And the first one's caffeine, right? Because we're all having our coffee and our tea. The second one is like birth control hormones. And then the third one is an antidepressant, or SSRI.
Wow.
So it's so prevalent that it's in a testable amount, one of the top 3 in our wastewater stream. So anxiety, yeah.
Well, it's funny. Our friend who's a doctor, she said that amongst her doctor friends, they said that they should just put antidepressants in the water.
Like fluoride.
Because everybody needs it, right?
Just drink it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they. It's interesting because it's the diagnosable levels whenever it becomes paralyzing. So anxiety could be helpful, and
Right.
it should be for most people. If we don't have anxiety, then we're not going to get up and go to work. We're not going to study for a test. There's a healthy level, but then there's a paralyzing level where it's so much that we aren't able to function at a normal level, and that's
Right.
when it starts to be diagnosed.
Right. And do those two seem to go hand in hand, anxiety and depression?
Yeah. The technical term is comorbid, which I always thought was a weird word,
Yeah.
because the
Sounds like death.
yeah, co-death, like
Right.
together.
Double death.
Like what's that movie where like the 2 old people die and they're holding their hands?
It's the
Yeah, it's something.
the Notebook.
The Notebook.
Yes.
That's what it sounds like to me, comorbid, but that's not what it is.
Good.
Comorbid is actually when things coexist at the same time. So, diabetes, heart pressure, hypertension, those things are comorbid. But anxiety and depression are comorbid 60% of the time.
Wow.
And so what I like to tell my parents and our clients is that, hey, anxiety and depression are best friends. They go together wherever they're going. They're going to the bathroom together. They're going to a concert together. Anxiety and depression are usually there together. So when we see one, the other one is most likely there.
So are they going to be at kind of the same level, or there's going to be one that's more prominent, or it just depends on the person?
It depends on the person. It's a chicken and the egg argument, right? So which causes which? Typically if you're prone to struggle with anxiety, you're going to be prone to struggle with bouts of depression because anxiety is exhausting. Always being hypervigilant, having trouble catching your breath, always looking around, difficulty sleeping. All those things are risk factors for depression. So you're more likely to see those depressive episodes. And then if you're depressed all the time, you're not getting your stuff done, and that can make you really anxious. So then you start seeing anxiety, and your mind is stuck in that fight or flight stage, and so then you become more anxious. There's usually a predominant one. They're not usually at the same level, but they usually feed off of each other.
It's so interesting as you described what anxiety feels like, because I struggle with anxiety too. I really realized that I probably have always. I can remember my mom saying, if you don't stop worrying so much, you're going to have ulcers when you're older. So I guess I've always had that problem. But it feels like you're kind of always on the wall, always on guard, always kind of looking around to see, okay, what do I need to handle? And it is exhausting. Yeah. And so, having that as a child, it's funny that they should feel like that, because you feel like childhood is so carefree and, you don't have bills or things, major responsibilities, but they struggle with it, as we're finding out. Just as much.
Yeah, they actually found that the average age of onset of anxiety disorders is 11 years old.
Wow.
And then you're most likely to get diagnosed with it in your mid-20s. And so, these are old statistics because that's the way statistics are. I think that'll be changing as we're developing as a country and in our understanding of anxiety and depression. But I keep that in mind whenever you see adults. You're like, man, you've been carrying this for a long time. A long time.
Yeah. I mentioned that I struggle with anxiety. Now we have 2 kids that we know have it. So is there a hereditary trait to it?
So I'm guessing you struggle with guilt too then?
Haven't gotten there yet, but maybe now.
Good.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you shouldn't feel guilty.
No, I'm joking.
It's typically the parent response whenever, oh man, I struggle with my anxiety and I'm seeing this in my kid. And now I'm putting on the cloak of guilt and shame on that
Right.
I should have done better or whatever. The research can't really be definitive on whether this is hereditary or environmental. But what we do know is that there's probably 3 things that are happening. There's probably a genetic factor, there's probably an environmental factor, and then there's definitely a choice factor. Not in that I choose to be anxious or I choose to be depressed, but either I choose to fight it or I choose not to fight it.
Oh, okay.
And then the metaphor people use, which I think is a terrible metaphor, is the metaphor of a gun, where there's genetics is the actual gun, and then the environment is the trigger, and then your kind of choice is whether you pull it or not. I don't think it's that simplified, but the image is helpful. So what's more fascinating to me is that why is there more anxiety nowadays? Why are kids seeming more anxious? What's more fascinating to me is why are there people that have these anxiety genetic markers and then they don't struggle with anxiety? Those are the things that are more fascinating to me as a therapist.
And what are your thoughts?
My thoughts, there's a lot of theories out there, but my thoughts are that we have tried to rescue our kids a little bit too much. And so in our effort to try to protect them, we haven't equipped them to deal with hardship. So if you think about it in terms of you have a person that can walk and they don't want to walk. Okay, I have a 3-year-old son. He doesn't want to walk sometimes. But if you carry someone who's able to walk for so long, their muscles begin to atrophy and they aren't able to walk.
Wow.
And so I'm really like the theory that there's actually a New York Times article that was just published last week that came up with a new term called the snowplow parent. So the helicopter parent.
We talked about this last week,
is
didn't we?
Last year. So it's good. You're timely.
Yeah.
But the snowplow parents, I'm going to do anything that we can to avoid obstacles. And so I think that contributes to our anxiety because anxiety is fed whenever we start avoiding the things that are making us anxious. And we see this kid and it's like, oh man, being with your peers is making you anxious. So let's just not go to daycare. Let's just not do that. Instead of walking alongside them and equipping them saying, hey, mommy feels anxious too. You know what mommy does whenever she feels worried? We take deep breaths and we're practicing those things and we're equipping them to deal with these sufferings. So then now when they're dropped in college and mommy and daddy aren't there to remove the obstacles, that's when we start getting these spikes in diagnosis of anxiety disorders.
Wow.
No skills.
I have some insight on part of the reasons why I think there may be more anxiety
Yeah.
now. I think about when I was coming up through school, at least in Pennsylvania. I can't vouch for here, but we just went to school and did our work, and we took our regular tests. And every now and then they'd say, "Oh, okay, you have to take the Iowa test of basic skills." I remember that one very specifically. I think they still do that in many places. That was it. Now, I mean, last week was on STAR testing, and I think high stakes testing can play a major role too, or it may be spiked moments of anxiety, or just the pressure. Like my son's a fifth grader, he's in fifth grade, and it's it's known that if you don't pass fifth grade, or I remember even saying when I taught eighth graders that you have to pass. You have to pass.
Yeah.
The STAR test.
Yeah, and if you don't pass, you may have to go to summer school, and if that doesn't happen, then you might be retained.
Yeah.
And so we see kids that get nervous there.
Yeah.
Then also I've worked with kids, privately for SAT and ACT prep, and I've seen kids who, when they're working with me privately, they do great. They knock it out the park. Scores go up significantly. But then when it's time to take the actual test in real time, the scores settle right back down to where they started before they even took it. And so I wonder, how does that happen? That outside of the quote unquote real test time, because you can't fake your way to rate. You can't. The scores I've seen jump that much.
Yeah.
Like there was a significant increase, but then when it was time to get it back down, when they took the test in real time, they weren't really succeed. What they showed me privately did not transfer to the results on the test.
Right.
So there's something else going on there, because
Sure.
it's not just content.
Right.
Kids get nervous, and I've seen kids fret. They were crushing it all year long, and then it comes time for the STAR test, whatever. Then they just get,
Yeah. I
nervous.
think a lot of teachers have seen that, where the kids straight A's and then they just bomb the test. Any psychiatric hospital in the DFW area, and which is what I know about, but I venture to guess across the world are full around STARS time. So they, it's just kids that are really struggling. And we think our foundational truth that we teach parents at 212 Behavioral is that your value is not tied to your choices. Okay? Your consequences are, but your value is not up for grabs. You have absolutely zero authority over your value and your worth as a person and your worth as a human being. So, hey, you bomb this test, mommy's still going to love you. No big deal. But your consequences are, we're going to take it again. No big deal. But that's not the way that things are phrased to the teachers, and that's not the way things are phrased to the kids. And so then they're like, okay, if I fail this, I'm stupid.
Right.
And so then it becomes these identity statements.
And a loser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting even about the English language, if you think of the Spanish language, they say, I have fear, right? It's something I possess. And in English, we say, I am afraid.
It's identity.
It's identity, right? So
Wow.
then it's going to the core of it. And so, like, I failed. No, buddy. We just didn't do a good job on the test. But even, like, our English language predisposes us to take those things to heart and make it an
interesting.
identity statement. So I agree with you. I think it's probably not the test itself, but the way that we approach the test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, you wouldn't be hard pressed to find the statistics on those in mental health hospitals and 8-year-olds that are feeling suicidal because they don't want to take a test.
Yeah, I remember when I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and there, shout out to all my Pitt alumni checking this out here, but they have a building that's called the Cathedral of Learning. It's the tallest academic building in the United States. It's a beautiful structure, and almost every single year, we would hear news of someone jumping off of the Cathedral of Learning every year.
It's a metaphor, huh?
Yeah, I mean, the students, and so I just wonder, what's going on there. I hear about other countries where if you don't pass a certain test, you are on the path to go to college, or you're not on the path to go to college. And if you don't do well, I think it's like around fifth or sixth grade or so, that this makes or breaks the whole trajectory of your life. and so I can see kids that struggle with their identity, to your point, and that leads to other areas of struggle in the classroom as well, because of how they see themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we also spend less time being kids these days.
Yeah.
When I was little, when I was probably DJ's age, he's 11. I think I still have pigtails, and that's
did?
maybe not. But
Oh,
I had they have pigtails longer back then than
Pigtails
they do
are
now.
timeless.
Yeah, right. But kids are older much sooner. We played outside a whole lot more than they do now. We didn't spend a whole lot of time on computers. Well, there might not have been computers for some of us, but we didn't spend a lot of time doing, typing stuff and things like that. We were playing with sticks and rocks and dolls
Right.
and things like that outside.
I wasn't playing with dolls.
You missed
Maybe.
out.
I must have.
Well, even-
But you see what I say?
Yeah.
What I'm saying?
Well, I'd even say that what's funny about that is that might be a little bit of hindsight bias, because my grandparents have a farm, right? And so, like, even if you look past, like, this, we've glorified childhood and adolescence a lot, too. And so it's not even so much that kids spend less time being kids. We just put them in, like, a weird, this is your job now, is to sit and do a 9 to 5 when our body wasn't really built like that.
Exactly.
So like even kids 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago that were out working, milking farms at 5 years old, they still were working, but there was this is what we do to contribute as a family, as opposed to you're ruining your whole life if you don't pass this test. And that's a weird pressure. We're living in a really weird place right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
Let me ask you this. So how does one's socioeconomic status impact anxiety and depression as far as being diagnosed? But so I guess twofold. So is there any information on the ratios of one group versus another?
Prevalence of it?
Yeah, prevalence of it, but also treatment as well, as far as who is getting treated and who's not getting treated.
If you have money, you're getting treated just because you have money to be treated. And also there's
or insurance,
right, and insurance, and there's also there's cultural biases based off of seeking help or not seeking help.
You're right about
you're
that.
right, yeah.
And so in some populations, we'll back up a little bit, anger is a number one symptom of depression in kids.
Right.
And so if you have an angry kid, in some cultures, they're going to say, just spank him more.
Yes.
Just discipline him more. You're
Right.
not doing your
Right.
job as a parent, and you're failing in that. Whereas more affluent populations are going to say, like, hey, maybe there's something wrong. Maybe there's something going on that's underneath that, because they're less likely to think it's your fault. Like the more you move up in the socioeconomic status, you're looking for outside
External.
circumstances that are impacting what's going on in your child. Versus saying like, oh man, I'm blowing it here. I'm not disciplining. I'm not, spanking hard enough or whatever, grounding enough. I'm not taking stuff away. We've all the therapists online have seen the kid that has like nothing in their room. Like they don't even have a door. They took everything away. And it's just not helping because the kid's not just angry because they're angry.
Right.
Angry doesn't stand on its own 2 feet. There's always something underneath it.
Yeah.
And so you can even go back to infancy, that children from a lower socioeconomic status are spoken to 10 to 100-fold less than people that as they move up in economic status. So I grew up in a lower income household, and you're just kind of spoken around, and then you're giving commands. Whereas if you're more affluent, you're spoken to like, oh, look at this color blue. Mommy's folding the laundry. And you're just kind of developing some of those things, which just creates this huge gap before they're even in school age children. So they might not even hear the
Is it
words.
30 million words?
Right.
I think that it is.
Yeah.
The gap between kids from low income families and high income families, they have that many fewer words, or they hear that many fewer words.
And you better believe some of those words are emotional words.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so then that starts to develop where kids of higher socioeconomic status have higher emotional intelligence. And so, this kid knows how to say, I'm frustrated or I'm hurt, when this kid just kicks something.
Right.
Wow. What about the impacts of just, everyday living with, for children from poverty backgrounds? Just just living under a stressed environment, you know, how does that contribute to anxiety and depression?
Yeah, partly they don't know they're stressed, which is just the beauty of childhood. You know things like I'm hungry, I'm not hungry, but you don't know when at a certain age that there's so much against you.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of look at that retroactively.
Probably because that's all they see. Their
Right,
friends are
that's what
experiencing
their
the same
buddies,
thing.
You're playing with your
Right.
same friends.
Yeah.
You know, you're all eating bologna sandwiches.
Right.
You know, your parents are both at work. You're all kind of hanging up and raising each other in that regard. But you're less likely to be to get into therapy. Whenever there's an issue, a child of lower socioeconomic status is more likely to go to the emergency room and then to the psychiatric hospital, as opposed to those what you'd like to see, the normal progression of,
right.
you know, you see your family medicine doctor. People of lower socioeconomic status are less likely to have an actual pediatrician that they go to regularly.
Yeah.
You know, you're less likely to go to individual counseling. It's just kind of 0 to 100 in that regard.
Yeah. You know, I know, you know, as a teacher, you know, when I was in the classroom, it was very, you saw the kids who knew had support at home and who had a system and a network at home
Right.
to support them. And they came, you know, not that kids, you know, don't have issues, but they came better prepared to learn
Right.
because they had the love and the support and the encouragement, and you saw it. And you know who was engaging with me as a teacher, the parents who were engaging with me, making sure that they were getting what they were supposed to get, and hey, I'm worried about this and that and the other, and you know, there's that support system there. Then I saw kids who it just broke my heart, still breaks my heart, of who I knew just had no support at home.
Right.
And we call parents, you know, they'd say, well, what do you want me to do about it?
Right.
You know, our kids, you know, fatherlessness was a big issue with many students as well. And so, you know, as a teacher, I'm seeing, you know, I saw all these backgrounds coming together. Had one girl, I remember she had slits, all 8th graders had slits all up and down her arms from attempting suicide. I don't know where I'm going with this, but
Well,
I
have a question that, that you brought that I'm thinking
I'm
because of
just
what you were saying.
observing, yeah.
So, as a parent, you're talking about some of the people that don't have support at home, and what is it that what are the symptoms? What should we be looking out for? Because a lot of these symptoms are missing. So what happened with our child is he was starting to have outbursts at home.
Yeah.
And you said anger is one of the primary symptoms, and we had no idea. He had normally been an even-keeled kid.
Very happy.
Or they're having outbursts during transitions, those sort of things, like paying attention to when are these outbursts, when are they happening, and then trying to get underneath, like, what's the why behind the action? The actions aren't going to be on their own. What's the why underneath that? And really trying to connect with your kid. And they, you know, are they using a certain word frequently, like, oh, I'm worried, or I'm scared, or what are their dreams like? Because a lot of times you're trying to compensate for those emotions that they're having in the day at night. Are they not sleeping? Do they look tired? That's a huge indicator.
Yeah, or teachers complaining that they're sleeping in class.
Right. And even if they might be anxious and they might just be hiding out, you know, turtling and acting like they're sleeping.
The thought was just left my head completely. Oh, yes. So teens are sleepy. They sleep a lot.
Oh, yeah.
How do you know the difference between a sleepy kid and one that's actually sleeping more because of depression setting in?
I think that you can't do all these things on your own. So having if you feel like there's a little bit of a red flag and like, man, this seems excessive, and you're talking to your buddies. I love that you said you can't do this alone. It has to be in community. I think a lot of our parenting struggles, the reason why we created 212 Behavioral is because parents are doing all this alone, and they think like, oh, they sent this kid home with me in the hospital, and they said, you'll know what to do. You're a mom. That's the biggest lie. I don't know what to do.
Right.
I have so many degrees. I have no idea.
Right.
I have no idea,
Yeah.
you know. But talking to your friends that have teenagers and saying, hey, what's that look like? There's a really great book that came out last year called Why We Sleep. And it just looked at the research of sleep. And one of the things that we know is that teenagers' circadian rhythm actually changes in their teenage years. So they actually get sleepy later. So about everything shifts about 2 hours. And so if you're getting tired around 10, they're not tired until midnight. They're not just lying to you. Their physiology is changing. One of the theories behind that is that that's their way of kind of preparing for being separate from their parents. That they're kind of creating their whole world, including that sleepy time. And they've actually tied improvement in school to switching school times
to a later time.
To a later time,
Yeah.
because it matches with that circadian rhythm. During daylight savings time, the one where you lose an hour, heart attacks go up 23%. One where you gain an hour, heart attacks go down 23%.
Oh, good Lord.
So we know even 1 hour of sleep can be impactful. And so if your child's just going to bed later and sleeping later, that's not too much of an indicator. But if they are out of it all the time, if they're trying to just look like they have a lower energy that never really picks up, teenagers will usually see them get more perky towards the evening. If that's just never happening, that should be a red sign.
Yeah. And we've also found out that there's a difference between young kids that have anxiety and depression and the older kids, like maybe 13, 14, 15 and above. When they told me that our son had depression, I said, well, he is the happiest depressed kid I've ever met, but it was the anger.
Yeah.
Are there any other symptoms that are really more prevalent in younger kids?
Yeah, I think the biggest indicator to me is the outbursts, right? That's what you're going to see the most in kids that are younger. The tantrums. We get a lot of calls from parents who are like, man, my kid is just losing it. And then we sit and we talk about it and we found out, oh, it's during transitions when you're changing things, or whenever you said you were going to do something one way. And it's not that way. Or on Mondays, if we usually go to the grocery store and then we did something different and then the kid's just losing their mind, those are indicators for younger kids, those tantrums, that something else is going on inside of them. And, grown people, they shouldn't, but they still throw tantrums sometimes when they're feeling anxious. If you don't believe me, just pay attention when you're trying to get off an airplane.
Oh.
Nobody's happy trying to get off an airplane.
No.
Nobody cares about you.
Or driving down 360
Yes.
in traffic.
I was in the traffic and all these people were cutting me off and I'm just thinking, hey, buddy, I've got places to go too.
Right.
Yeah.
But we have a little bit more coping skills than children.
Yeah, absolutely.
So kind of transitioning to treatment now. I know one of the things that we struggled with was identifying support for younger children.
Yeah.
There's not much out there. And it can be challenging. So can you talk just about, what type of support and resources are out there for kids, depending upon what age level they're at and things like that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe you're alluding to, there aren't very many children's psychiatrists, and the ones that are out there, it's really hard to get into them. It's like months. One of the things that I advocate for with all my parents is go to your pediatrician. Okay, they can help diagnose and treat basic level anxiety and depression, but also medication isn't always necessary. So you can start with individual therapists. I have lots that I like, and then there are a few of them that see people under 12 years old, and then they because it becomes challenging. What are you going to do at that point? It becomes more parent-centered. So that's where companies like 212 Behavioral, where you go in and say, hey, I'm going to coach you on how we're handling this anxiety and this depression, because when we look at the environment, the parent is the thermostat and the child is the thermometer. And we get that backwards a lot, where we think the child sets the temperature for the room when really it's the parent.
It's
so
the parent.
they have this predisposition to anxiety, and so then we have this great responsibility of how do we adjust our lifestyle to help them become a successful adult. What needs to be adjusted in our routine, what needs to be adjusted in our diet, what needs to be adjusted in the way that we discipline, like kind of what you guys were saying, that you had to completely change what you were doing. You have an anxious kid that's lashing out, so then you're coming down on them really hard is not going to be helpful. You're yelling at them whenever our physiology says with children, they just kind of freeze up and they aren't able to deal with that. So we're kind of in this ugly cycle. So there are things that our parents support like that. There's individual therapy, and then there are group workshops. There's psychiatrists. But I always think the greatest place to start is talking to your community, talking to your friends, and then, looking for resources once you need to escalate.
Right,
Yeah.
and Facebook is a great resource of communities of parents. There's always a page for something.
Yeah, and always a crazy person on the page.
Probably, yeah.
You're not supposed to say that, but I was also going to say that the school districts are a fantastic resource too. They are a great hindrance and a great pain and a great resource. So it's like, don't get frustrated if you don't get what you want the first time, but they have school psychiatrists or school psychologists at your call. They have 504 plans that you can do, but you just have to be able to advocate for them, which is
Absolutely.
what you guys are doing here. Is you're teaching parents how to advocate. The people in the lower socioeconomic status don't know how to advocate for themselves. And so there's always, there can be therapists, there can be companies like my company that go in and say, hey, this is what you need to ask for. Let us write you a letter. This is who you need to talk to. This is what we need to ask the
Nice.
school teacher to do. And we do that a lot with like kids with ADHD or anxiety. Whenever they're having a lot of power struggles with the teacher, it can be incredibly helpful to have a third-party professional go in and say, hey, let's try this. It may be the same thing the parent's saying, but it's coming from someone else's mouth, and that's kind of
Yeah.
holds
And
more
someone
weight.
who's not intimidated to speak to
Right.
the room of people.
Authority.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know, one of the challenges as a teacher is, it's a mixed bag who we're getting in the classroom.
Right.
Now for kids who have a 504 or, an IEP, it's very clear. But there are other students that I saw all the time that we didn't have any paperwork. And I even asked my coworkers, do we have any paperwork on this child?
Yeah.
And it's like, no. Or we find out, the mom said, well, I decided not to, give them medication or, whatever the circumstances are. So, there was a lot of challenges going on there. What are,
But a lot of parents don't realize that anxiety and depression is something you can get accommodations for.
right.
That
Right.
was something completely new to us, and it was recommended to us by our psychiatrist or psychologist. And she told us that, and we were like, oh, because he was struggling at school.
Right.
And obviously it's only if they are having problems with their academics. It has to be a problem in the classroom.
Right.
But in our case, it was his grades were plummeting, and it was abnormal. And we put some measures in place so that he was able to succeed more. We're still working on some things.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, we definitely have not arrived
But
yet.
that's something, but that's something very important for parents
Right.
to understand
Right.
is that there's help within the school.
Right. So how does anxiety affect academics? I mean, just as a whole. And we talked about testing a little bit before,
Yeah.
but how does it impact just academics?
Yeah, and I would even back up to say, like, how does anxiety affect us in general, right? So our anxiety affects us in general, where you have that hypertension, the difficulty breathing, the difficulty focusing. That hypervigilance is a term that we use. You think of, like, you can always tell the off-duty police officer that's eating at Texas Roadhouse or something because the guy doesn't have his back to the door and he's like always looking. It's like that. A person with anxiety has that level of hypervigilance all the time, so
That
their
happens
brain
at
doesn't
Texas
shut off.
Roadhouse?
I mean, I used to work at Texas Roadhouse.
Oh, okay.
I could
I
always
didn't
tell
know.
they
Let's
came
go-
in. They're
go
like
check it
the
out.
guy
Yeah.
that's like fighting to not have his back to the door, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
you've got a little bit of like stuff going on.
Right.
But yeah, so it's that, and then you put that, transfer all those things into the school environment, and now you feel like, especially if they're in middle school where they have these things to where they feel like they're on a stage anyway, that everybody's looking at them. And so then the anxiety is hyper intensified. That it's like, man, everybody's looking at me. I can't focus on my grades. I'm having a hard time reading. When people do that thing where you take turns reading and you're like trying to figure out, okay, there's 3 people in front of me. Everybody's reading a paragraph. I'm going to practice reading this paragraph. And then the person ahead of me reads something different, and now they're totally thrown off, and then they throw a fit. But yeah, academically, it could either look like a hyper focus on academics, and they could be the straight A student that has cuts all the way up and down their arm because they're trying to cope with their anxiety.
Wow.
Which is the people that are more likely to do self-harm are the straight A perfectionistic students, although I think that statistic is changing as we speak. Or it could be struggling in grades, so it's not necessarily going to be decreased grades all the time. It could be a hyper focus where I do feel like my value and my worth is tied to my academics.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
We have so little time, man. We have to have you back. I do have one quick question before we move on to one more thing that I wanted to do. If you have been if your child has been diagnosed and is receiving therapy or treatment or medication, whatever it is that they're doing, how do you know if it's not working? Is there a new normal? This is the thing that we were confused about. We were like, is he supposed to turn back to who we knew before, or is there a new normal? Kind of, is it based on the child?
So anxiety and depression are a little bit different in that regard. Even the DSM says that an average depressive episode lasts about 9 months. And so you might be able to, that's without treatment. You might be able to see the same kid that pops back with depression. With anxiety, that's more of a chronic thing. I have asthma, so I like to compare it to asthma, where I have to, get up every morning. I have to take my inhaler, and there's some things I can and can't do because of my asthma. But with anxiety, it's going to be something that they're going to fight all the time, and they're going to be flare-ups. And there's going to be really good seasons, and there's going to be hard seasons, and that's okay, because we're going to teach them, and we're going to equip them that the world doesn't end whenever everything feels like it's crashing in. But we're going to teach them, hey, this is how we be a human in a scary world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like that's kind of going to be a lifelong thing that you have to learn to cope with. There's no cure,
right?
Necessarily.
Yeah, but there are ways that you get to handle it.
Okay.
And I don't want us to sink into hopelessness in that.
Right.
Yeah.
It could be a really beautiful new normal. There's people like you that are advocating for people that don't know anything that are dealing with that. Just because something's hard for someone doesn't mean it's not good for them.
Yeah.
And that's something I try to teach parents all the time.
So
That just because this is hard for them doesn't mean it's not going to be good for them. It's going to be really, really good for them. And so allowing this to be an opportunity to be hopeful that this could mold them in the person that they need to be.
That's awesome. So one real quick, may not be real quick, but one thing that I found on
pretty quick.
I know. On mighty.com.
Yeah.
And you said you knew a little bit about that website. I had never seen it before. I just kind of Googled and came across this. But I found an article and it talked about it really interviewed people who currently experience it's mental illness, but, we're talking about anxiety and depression, but what they would want their parents to know.
Yeah.
And I just love that. So here's just a little excerpt of that. When a child scrapes his knee, mom's there with a Band-Aid. When a child falls ill, dad's there with chicken soup. But what does a parent do when they can't kiss the pain away? Watching your child develop a mental illness, especially if you're unfamiliar with the signs, can be confusing and rough for the whole family. For parents, it can be frustrating, not knowing what to do, what to say, or what to make of all of it, and how to make it better. We asked people in our community who live with mental illness to tell us one thing they wish their parents understood. So here's a couple of them, and I want kind of your feedback about these. So one is, sometimes I just feel like crap. I don't always have an explanation as to why, so when you ask me, I can't always answer. I know you want to help, but as hard as it may be, you just sometimes have to sit back. Another one was, I know that you feel like you should be able to help somehow, but it isn't up to you. Medication and therapy, in addition to your unconditional love and support, is the best thing for me. Then they said, I'm not doing this on purpose. This isn't some attempt at rebellion or a guilt trip or me trying to punish you. This is part of me and harder to deal with than you realize. Another person said, it's not a parent's job to fix their child. There are doctors for that. It's a parent's job to love, support, and encourage your child so that they feel less broken and alone. Another said, you did not do anything wrong raising me, Mom. I'm going to choke up on that. I will overcome this illness and be a productive member of society again one day. I just need time to let my body and soul heal. I love you more than you know for your love and support. Another one said, Mom and Dad, I wish you would have taken this seriously and got me the help I asked for. You're my family and I can't count on you. That's a tough one. Mm-hmm. And I don't always have control over my emotions and reactions. I try my best to stay in control, but it's hard to constantly fight a battle I feel like I'm losing. So what are some of your reactions, both of you guys, to some of those?
Yeah.
I know you've heard some of that in your practice.
Yeah, it's hard because I think as parents we think that we're never doing it right. We're never doing it good enough. And I don't know how many, there may be moments where our kids are like, you've done a really good job, but sometimes in their hurt and their anger, they reach for things that are the most painful things to hear, of like, you weren't enough. And so I think a lot of those are really spot on in saying, back to that fundamental choice or fundamental truth, that our value isn't tied to our choices. And so one of the things I like to say to my kids all the time, I have a sister that really struggles with anxiety too, is I'm the only one in my family that graduated college, and so she feels like academics is kind of the way to please me. And so she would call me a lot, and she would say, Sissy, I made an A or whatever. I'm like, oh, that's great. Do I love you more now that you made an A? And then she'll say, no. Like, what if you made a D? Would I love you less? No, you wouldn't love me less. Okay, would I be proud of you if you made an F? Yes, you'd be proud of me. And it's like this whole eye-rolling thing. She's like, okay, whatever, I get it, you love me. But I think that's important to say, like, you're having a great day. That's so awesome. I'm so glad. How do you feel about it? Do I love you more now that you're having a good day? And just having those external conversations, people say, hey, buddy, your value and my affections for you have absolutely nothing to do with your mental state, but I'm so glad that you can be able to experience this joy that has been given to you today.
Yeah. I love that your practice works with parents, because you can't give what you don't know yourself.
Absolutely.
A lot of us didn't get that growing up. And this is kind of a new stage of parenting. I think it was maybe a little more hands off in generations back.
Yeah.
And now we're doing things a lot different than our parents sometimes. And so we're learning. We're learning with one another. And so I love that your practice works with the parents to help them. Did any of those resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, I know, sometimes kids can feel like they're struggling, on their own. They're in their own world of struggle, and sometimes without the support and without feeling unconditionally loved, they can feel like someone, that they're kind of just going through this by themselves. But when we begin to see kids for who they are, that their identity is not wrapped up in how they perform, and as parents, we want the best for our children, and we want them to succeed. But I think you and I, Danita, can even work on how we even show, how we respond to, this is great what you said about how we respond when they're not doing as well academically as we think that they should.
Yeah, being educators, that can be tough.
Yeah, being a teacher, and we both work in education is kind of wow, but that our love for them is not connected to that.
You could still do better, but I'm gonna love you no matter what.
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
And I think just being, just for all parents, us included, just being more intentional about saying and speaking these things out of our mouths, and speaking life into our children, whether they're struggling with anxiety and depression or not, but that we're speaking life into them, and that can go a long way in helping children when they're going through that. They know, what, my mom, my dad, they still love me. This is tough, but I know at the end of the day that whether I act out or not, that my parents are going to love me unconditionally, because it's not based upon what we do, it's based upon who we are and our identity. And so, yeah, that's great.
And just really, really quick, one of the things I'd say too is, as a parent, taking responsibility over your own emotional responses, so that your kid doesn't feel like their actions is in charge of your emotions. So they can't make you mad, they can't make you frustrated, they can't do anything like that. But you're saying, hey, when mama gets frustrated, that's on me, and I'm sorry. But so that they're not tying those things of like, oh, if I get an F, my parents won't be able to handle it. That they're going to crush them. That, oh, you are my sunshine. Da, 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 da. But you're not. I'm really proud of you, and I love you, and I'm responsible for my emotions and handling my anxiety, and I'm not going to put that on you.
That's good. Real quick, are there any resources, like national resources, websites, or anything that we can go to seek information? Like the Mighty was.
Yeah,
is
the
that one you
Mighty's a
would
great
recommend?
one. Mighty's just good, different articles, things like that. There's a thing called growth mindset, which they use in education a lot. There's a couple of apps that I use in regards of mindfulness that are really helpful. Pixie or Chixie or something.
Explain mindfulness real quick.
Mindfulness is just the ability to pay attention to what's happening in your body. Kids that are feeling anxious have no idea what's going on. And so helping them understand, hey, are you anxious? Does your tummy feel like there's spaghetti in it? Do your shoulders feel really tight? Are you feeling worried? And then having them pay attention while we walk through calming down exercises. Because we let them have a passy when they're a baby. We held them, we comforted them, and then we took it away. And we said, hey, you're not allowed to have any more of these coping skills. You can have your blankie because you're not big enough. But giving them things in the transition time of being mindful, let's take deep breaths and pay attention to watching the spaghetti go away in our belly and our shoulders relax. And there's a couple of really cool apps that do that.
Real quick, what about for someone who may not have insurance, or maybe they have insurance, but deductibles are so high? As a teacher, I'm not even going to lie, deductibles were horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible. Anyway, that's another topic for another day.
Yeah.
But what if they don't have the funds?
Where do they go?
Where do they go?
So under the Affordable Health Care Act, if you're any insurance is supposed to have options for mental health coverage. So then it's finding psychologists or counselors that are under your, even if you have Medicaid, they're great counselors. There's a website called psychologytoday.com where you can find a therapist, and that's actually updated by the therapist themselves. So if they no longer take Aetna, they're going to take Aetna off the list. If they do a sliding scale, that's therapy lingo for saying if you don't have enough money to pay our X amount of fees, then we'll drop it down to whatever, maybe $30 a session. If you have Medicaid, they're not allowed to charge a copay. And so things like that. There's a parenting center in Fort Worth that's for people that don't have any income. There's, lots of options. If you can Facebook us on 212 Behavioral. We'll give you some resources. If we're not the right fit for you, then we'll help you find who is.
And we'll have some, I'll get that information from you and we'll put that on our website so people can access it. So unfortunately, we are out of time. We have so many more questions. Can we have you back on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think we even got through a third of the questions.
No, we didn't.
No.
We didn't. So thank you so much for joining us. We
Thanks
really
for having me.
appreciate the information you shared with our listeners. And we always want to tell you guys about what's going on with Noggin. So what's going on with Noggin Educational Coaching?
So, 'tis the season for high-stakes testing, and we want to help alleviate anxiety that students may have by helping them become better prepared academically. And so we offer test prep for state exams. We also offer test prep for SAT, ACT. If you're looking to get into private schools, IC test prep as well. And so reach out to info@noggineducation.com, and we'll get back to you and show you how to get this process started.
And with Noggin Educational Foundation, we are gearing up for Spark. Spark is our summer math and reading program. Spark stands for Summers Producing Academically Ready Kids. And we do a bunch of fun hands-on activities. And we need help putting together said fun hands-on activities. So if you are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, hit us up at Donita, DONEDA, at nogginfoundation.org. And Noggin is spelled like your head, NOGGIN. And you can always, of course, go to our website. That information is also on schooldaysshow.com. So next week, we will be talking about your school board. No words from David. Okay.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about them myself.
Right.
I taught for 10 years and don't really know what they do.
Yeah, so I, for one, haven't given a second thought to the school board, probably like many parents. But I've come to realize that my vote for school board members may be the vote that most impacts our children's education. So joining us will be the president and secretary of local Irving ISD School Board to tell us about what the school board does and how their decisions impact our kids.
All right. Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to that. As always, head to our website, schooldaysshow.com, for more info. And remember, you don't ever have to miss a show. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, and Stitcher. And we are looking forward to you guys listening in.
And you can always follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Noggin, NOGGIN Foundation. And there we share a lot of great tips for helping your student. We share information about programs and, of course, information about school days. So you're not going to want to miss on that. And lastly, we always want to end our show by saying that we are parenting by grace. We depend on God to give us the wisdom and strength we need to raise our kids into flourishing adults. And if you would like to know more about that, please feel free to email us at info@schooldazedShow.com. Have a great week.